Today we are here with Congressman Bobby Scott. How are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Welcome to the campus of Norfolk State University. It's going to be a very exciting day. We're really excited about this debate that's coming up later today.
It's going to be exciting. It's not the first time I've been on campus, and it won't be the last.
That's right. So you represent the 3rd District. You are on the Education and Labor Committee. You are the chair of the Health, Empowerment, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and you're on the House Committee.
I'm chair of the Education and Labor Committee.
Okay, so tell me this. Where does Virginia stand as a state? In years past, I've always heard that, our pension was good, our financial was good. Are we still in that same position, or have things changed with the pandemic?
The finances in Virginia are better than average for the country because, particularly in Hampton Roads, and in Northern Virginia, we have a substantial portion of our economy based on spending from the federal government. Mostly in this area, from the Defense Department, in Northern Virginia, a lot of the Defense Department with the Pentagon and other agencies. And that gives us a stability that a lot of states don't have. And so we've done much better through the pandemic as a state government than other states.
As a congressman, how can you address what is going on with the homework gap? First of all, how would you describe the homework gap, and how would you solve that problem?
Well, one of the problems with the distance learning is that it has exacerbated pre-existing achievement gaps. Mm-hmm. We hear a lot about healthcare in the health disparities. Those with pre-existing conditions do worse with the pandemic. The same thing happens in education. Those with pre-existing achievement gaps tend to do worse. Those on the bottom are less likely to have a computer, less likely to have good connectivity, be more likely to need in-person instruction. And so the in-distance learning has just made matters worse for those at the bottom of the achievement gap. That's why we have been pushing to get schools open if it can be done safely. Schools need resources to open safely. One is, of course, ventilation. They said that if you have proper ventilation, you don't have nearly as much trouble as if you don't have proper ventilation. That's why in restaurants they let you eat outside but not inside. The GAO did a study a few months ago, it was released a few months ago, that showed that 40% of the school districts in this country need to repair or replace their heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems in more than half their schools. If they had that problem before the pandemic, they can't afford it now.
Correct.
We need resources for that. We need resources for transportation. You can't have as many children on the bus. You need other kinds of, you need to make sure all the students have computers, all the students are connected. You need smaller class sizes, which means more money. But if you don't have the resources, you cannot properly reopen. That's why the COVID relief bills have so much money in it for education. And it's better for education, it's better for nutrition because they have access to school meals, it's better for emotional and social maturity because they're dealing with people every day, not isolated at home. You can more easily recognize child abuse. And let's get serious, you're not going to reopen the economy until you reopen the schools. So, but you cannot open the schools unless you put in the resources so it can be done safely. And that's why we've been pushing as hard as we can for the COVID relief bills, and why we've been so frustrated with the Senate and not being able to agree to another COVID relief bill. One of the first things you look at in a relief bill is what you're doing for state and local governments. Most states aren't as fortunate as Virginia with the support we get from the federal government. Many states are having significant revenue shortfalls. In fact, the experts project that if we don't do something, education budgets will get cut about $300 billion nationally. So if you don't have anything there for state and local, you start off $300 billion in the hole. The Senate bill has $100 billion for education, nothing for state and local. They're not even covering.
This is the one passed Thursday night?
This is the one that passed the House. Has enough in state and local, so there will be no cuts. Then we have $100 billion for education. The Senate bill has nothing for state and local. So the 100 billion they have for education doesn't even cover half the anticipated cuts. So the schools will have less money next year than they had this year, and nowhere close to what they actually need to open safely.
Finally, I want to ask you this: with all that is going on in America, please give your thoughts on the slaughter every day of Black Americans, and what can you, as an elected leader, do about that?
Well, which slaughter are you talking about?
All the slaughter of Black people in the streets every day at the hands of the policemen.
Okay, we passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. It has a lot of very important provisions. One, it prohibits chokeholds, where you choke people to death, prohibits no-knock warrants that cause so much mischief. It prohibits racial profiling, which doesn't do anything but target minorities for abuse. It has national standards for things like training in implicit bias and de-escalation and use of force. It holds police officers accountable, both civilly and when necessary criminally, for misbehavior, and it collects a lot more data than we're collecting now, so we know exactly what's going on. That passed the House, and the Senate. You know, we're going to have an election before we can get much passed by the Senate. The Senate has not taken it up. Bill I introduced to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. They haven't taken that up. There are a lot of other bills that are sitting over in the Senate that they won't take up, particularly things like climate change and that kind of thing, that they haven't taken up. So we need to make sure we have an election. The election is particularly important, and that's why this debate is so important, because the legislative branch and the executive branch are going to be even more important.
Yes.
They have essentially stolen 2 Supreme Court seats. And so we will not be able to rely on the Supreme Court for the foreseeable future. When the Supreme Court deals with health care, for example, they are expected to demolish the Affordable Care Act.
Correct.
If you have the executive branch and the legislative branch, we can look at what they did and pass new health care legislation to conform to their constitutional standard and fix it. If you do not have both the Senate and the House and the White House, they'll be able to block what you can do and end up with no health care, no protection for pre-existing conditions, no affordability credits to make sure people can have it, no Medicaid expansion that 400,000 people in Virginia are benefiting from, the whole Affordable Care Act, women paying more for insurance than men. Not all of that is at risk with the Supreme Court, but we can fix it if we have the right people elected in the U.S. House, U.S. Senate, and in the White House.
Congressman, we know that what happened with former President Barack Obama not being able to seat somebody on the Supreme Court, we know that was wrong. Today, do we follow that example that the Republicans did to former President Barack Obama, or do we do the right thing and allow the current president to pick his person for the Supreme Court?
Well, filling this vacancy is a moral outrage. 4 years ago, in an election year, they set a principle made a sanctimonious production.
They being Republicans.
Republicans out of not filling a vacancy in an election year. That they had about almost 10 months before the election.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now you are in an election year, even closer to the election, and they're going to fill it. A 4th grader would recognize that that is fundamentally not fair. They seem totally unaffected by the hypocrisy. And so they have the votes, they'll probably get away with it.
But what is the moral thing to do?
Well,
So going forward, do we keep
a
on?
4th grader would recognize that if you didn't fill it 4 years ago, you don't fill it this time.
So what does the Constitution say, and do we follow that, or do we follow morals?
The Constitution says they can fill it if they have the votes. But democracy does not work if you set principles and traditions and start violating them just because you have the votes. And so, like I said, a 4th grader would recognize that this is not fair. You made the call this time. Last time, same situation, you ought to make the same call. That's fundamental fairness, and a fourth grader would recognize that, and they're not doing it.
Right.
The response has got to be to hold them accountable. When politicians are acting as hypocritically as that, they ought to be defeated at the polls. That is our defense.
I asked you that because I wonder, so many things have changed from this administration. So many things, starting with showing taxes, so many things have changed. Will we get back to the quote-unquote normal standards?
It is up to the voters. If the voters
That's good.
would allow someone like Lindsey Graham in South Carolina to say, we would never fill a vacancy in an election year, we're not going to do it in 2016, we would never do it, and hold me accountable. And 4 years later, not even exact same situation, we are closer to the
Much
election.
closer.
And he is chair of the committee that's going to consider the nomination. If he moves forward, the voters of South Carolina will hold him accountable.
And he is in a tight race in South Carolina, from what I understand. It's not a shoo-in for him.
And it's basically a matter of character. Is your word worth anything? Are you fair? Are you a hypocrite? I mean, it's just, this close to an election, abuse of power and hypocrisy and being unfair is not how you want to go into an election. And the people should notice it and govern themselves accordingly.
Your final thoughts on voting, please. Whatever you want to tell the audience about voting.
This is the most important election that we've had because of the trajectory we'll go in. Not only the Supreme Court is what it is, and if we're going to be able to maintain voting rights, health care, right to an education, right against discrimination, it will depend on what happens in this election.
Thank you so much, Congressman Bobby Scott. I'm sure Wilkerson from the Blazing Hot Morning Show, and this is Camp Suite. Thank you so much.
Thank you.